In this video, I'm going to take a look at 7Artisans' new 24mm f1.8 full-frame autofocus prime lens. I'll cover the specs of the lens and show you how it performs on my Sony a7 IV in a variety of situations. And I'll also explain why 24mm is my favourite wider-angle focal length, briefly comparing the lens to one of my most used film-era lenses, the Super-Takumar 24 f3.5, as well as a new digital Tamron zoom lens, a highly rated lens that costs over twice the price, but as we'll see, the Tamron lacks some of the impressive features of the 7Artisans. Now we're going to have to pretend this is the first time I've unboxed this lens. It's not. Sadly, my PC's hard drive died suddenly, and I lost that video. Anyway, new PC, new video, and back to the lens, which is attractively and securely packaged, and it comes with a hood and USB cable. It's a reasonably compact size and weight, and it feels solid and well made. There are 14 elements in 11 groups, 11 aperture blades, a clickless aperture ring, and a 62mm filter size. On the side of the lens, there's an AF/MF toggle that I personally think is an essential feature for a top-quality prime lens. It's something that's missing on the Tamron. Also unlike the Tamron, the 7Artisans has a customizable button. I've got it set to focus lock, as I prefer to keep the autofocus setting on continuous, but sometimes want to lock the focus on subjects towards the edge of the frame. The focus ring is a good size, and on my copy it's quite tight to turn, which is good for accurate manual focusing. The movement on some of my other modern digital lenses is just too loose. Before discussing the lens's optical performance, I'd like to take a moment to explain why I think the 24mm focal length is such a good choice for wider angle shots. When I was a teenager, I inherited this Pentax Spotmatic 2 and 3 lenses. It was the beginning of my lifelong love of photography. For a while, I tended to use the 55 and 200mm lenses only. I wasn't sure I needed a 24mm lens. However, years later, by the time I was at university, the Takumar 24 had become my favourite lens. I use it a lot for walking around town and country and on holidays. It produced most of the photographs I wanted to hang on my wall. 24mm on full frame covers an attractive wider angle perspective for buildings and landscapes, and depending on how you frame a scene, you can produce quite a natural, undistorted look, or you can produce a slightly fishy look, with buildings leaning into the center. Sadly, when I tried the lens on my digital cameras, first on a crop sensor and then full frame, it was a disappointment. The colors and center frame details are okay, but the lens, with limited coatings, struggles with strong contrasts, and away from the center on full frame, the sharpness falls off quite noticeably. If you compare these two unprocessed photos taken on the same digital camera, you can see how poorly the Takumar handles the contrasts compared to the 7Artisans. The image looks more washed out, and the sunlit obelisk is almost blown. And on this comparison, zooming right into the tree trunks, the Takumar's rendering of the details is not nearly as good as the 7Artisans. Now on to how the 7Artisans lens performs. Using the lens for the first time confirmed how much I like this focal length, how it gives you a natural-looking wider angle of view. If you consider this classic set of columns, there's not a lot of distortion here. The columns to the far left and far right are not leaning extravagantly into the center of the frame. And some more shots. The tall objects at the size of these images are not leaning in fisheye style. This is a good result if you want to use the lens as a walk-around. You can get stretching of objects towards the edge of the frame if you move closer in some compositions. For example, stepping in towards this Mercedes on the right, the front of the car becomes stretched, but you'd expect that with a 24mm lens. If you choose the right composition, you can create a more fishy look, where tall buildings or other objects are leaning into the center. I enjoy this effect. It's a reasonably subtle result, and a good thing, as there are people, even in my house here, who simply don't care for more exaggerated fisheye photos. You also have the option, at least on my Sony camera, to select a 1.5 crop sensor mode, and this not only gives you a closer-up perspective, similar to a standard 35mm lens, but it also reduces the amount of leaning showing on full frame. Now onto how well this lens handles strong contrasts. Another must for a good quality wider angle lens, especially for walk around town shots where you're shooting in strong light with darker shadows. I tested the lens in some very high contrast, challenging situations, like this one, and it performs very well. The lens has captured a lot of details in the shadows, while at the same time, the very bright sunlit parts of the image are not overexposed or blown in any way. Outdoors and stop down, here are a few more examples in high contrast situations. The images also respond well to post-processing, where it's important to lighten up darker areas in the image to shed more light on this couple, for instance. Next, colours, and right from the start it's been noticeable how powerful the colours can be when the lens is stopped down, especially blues and reds. In the right light, when the camera is set to auto exposure settings, the lens can produce strong, rich colours, not overly HDR vibrant, but rather lovely, I think. On occasions, I found myself slightly increasing the exposure levels over the auto settings to brighten up the skies and darker areas, but I do like the option of having such strong colours if I want them. I'd rather have it this way than the other way around. It's interesting how both the new 7-Artisan and Tamron digital lenses render colours compared to the old Takuma. Returning to these two images, and leaving aside the more washed-out contrasts of the Takuma, you may have noticed a difference in colour tints, the 7-Artisans having a richer tint. If I add in a Tamron shot with the same scene, same settings, then you can see a very similar colour rendering from the two new lenses. For some lenses, I like a more washed-out look, but not for wider angle lenses, where strong colour contrasts are better in my opinion. While we're looking up at blue skies, the lens produces very clean sunbursts when you point it straight at the sun. I think the ability to produce good clean sunbursts is really important for wider angle lenses, and this lens with its 11 aperture blades stopped down to f16 produces very clean 22 ray sunbursts. Most of the photos we've seen so far were taken under blue skies, but what about the lens's performance in overcast or dim conditions outside? This is an important area to consider, as some wider angle lenses can produce rather flat results in overcast conditions. That's not a problem with this lens. St. Paul's Cathedral doesn't look at all bad on this grey day, and the images were easy to lighten up a little in post-processing. I was especially pleased how this shot came out. It reminded me of the good old days when I worked near Blackfriars and used to drink with friends after work at this historic pub. And if you decide to convert your colour shots into black and white, the lens's contrasts can produce stunning monochrome results. Turning to the lens's sharpness, I've been very impressed at how sharp the lens is at closer up and middle distances, and I'll start with stop-down examples. In this shot, for example, if I crop into the plaque, the detailed lettering has been very well rendered. The O2 in London was one of the first scenes I photographed with the lens. When I zoomed into the scene in the viewfinder, I was surprised to see people walking on the roof. I actually hadn't seen them with my naked eye, so that's a good testament to the details picked up by the lens. To get a little closer, I took this photo on the crop sensor mode. It's impressive how sharp the details are of the Cutty Sark's rigging in very strong light, with the sun just out of the frame to the right, and only a tiny bit of flare. The details towards the edges of images are well rendered too, although as we can see here, you do get that distortion in certain compositions. All the photos you've seen so far were taken using autofocus, and I found the camera-lens combination locks quickly onto the subject I wanted to lock on, and the autofocus mechanism is silent to my ears. This demo is taken wide open, and as well as the AF speed, it's interesting to see the white lettering. This lettering often shows signs of purple or green fringing wide open with other lenses, but there are no signs of that with this lens. For infinity shots, I found myself sometimes having to adjust the focus manually, not a lot of times, but occasionally, when the camera and lens couldn't quite decide on precisely what object needed to be focused on, such as this scene, but that's hardly a surprise, given the range of buildings to focus on in the distance. But generally, the focusing all worked very well for stills and videos, with no issues in focusing between long-distance and close-up subjects. By the way, the panorama from the top of the hill by the Greenwich Observatory, where Greenwich Mean Time is measured, is rather spectacular, and 24mm is a good wider angle for this. Not too close and not too far. You do, however, have to deal with the hordes of people also trying to capture the view. That's the lens's performance stopped down and at longer distances, so what about its performance wide open and for closer up shots? It's quite a fast lens for a wider angle prime, and it has a reasonably close minimum focus distance of 0.32 meters. Let's start with more of a test shot, firstly stop down and at the MFD, and this is a really sharp image. And now transitioning to wide open. Zooming into the gas, 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 I can't do a good Mick Jagger impersonation, the letter is still nice and sharp, an excellent result. Elsewhere, I've been having a lot of fun taking photos with this lens wide open and closer up, for example this beetle bug eye. Again, nice and sharp where it matters at f1.8. The results look good stopped down a little in black and white, or processed for a more HDR look. It's not a focal length that's going to produce fast 50s style bokeh, but the lens will produce a fair amount of soft blur in the right scenes. Obviously, with busier backgrounds, as we've got behind these flowers for instance, you're going to have quite busy bokeh. It's probably better to switch to crop mode for these kinds of compositions, to have a closer up perspective with less background in the frame. It can help to stop down a little, such as with this rather strange tabletop print. I think the extra details improve the impact of the close-up image. I also found that portrait-style shots are often better stopped down a little as well, to capture more in-focus details on the face, and not just have a nose in focus, as the wider angle tends to, quote, make my nose look big. Finally, nearly all the images I've shown you are taken outside, so how does the lens perform indoors? One of the important benefits of using a fast f1.8 wide-angle lens is that it's very useful for indoor shots. These photographs of the tulip staircase in the Queen's house in Greenwich came up particularly well. It's not the easiest scene to photograph, with a mix of bright light at the top and the shaded stairs. A variety of other shots from the Queen's house came up very well too, a perfect lens for tourists, and honest estate agents employed to capture interiors without producing too obvious and exaggerated stretching of room sizes. And for videos, the lens does a good job in low light, such as these London Underground trains sped up. In conclusion, I really like this focal length. Any wider and the distorted edges to composition start to irritate me. And with a camera that allows you to switch between full frame and crop sensor mode, 24mm becomes a very useful standard lens as well, equivalent to just over 35mm perspective on crop. The 7Artisans feels and performs like a top-quality prime lens should. It's sharp, it handles strong contrast very well, the AF is good and silent. The only downside I found was that stopped down, the lens sometimes produces slightly underexposed images using the Sony's auto settings, but this is easy to compensate for. And I think it's good value for money. Last year I purchased the highly rated Tamron to take photographs in Istanbul, where there are plenty of huge buildings that need a wide-angle perspective. But if I'd owned the 7Artisans at the time, I'd have definitely taken the 7Artisans instead, saved a heap of money, produced excellent photographs, with the vast majority of my best shots at 24mm anyway. I prefer the smaller size and features of the 7Artisans. It's quite a lot faster, and it has an aperture ring, an AF-MF toggle switch, and customizable button, all missing on the much more expensive Tamron. So I think the 7Artisans performance fully justifies its price, and it's an excellent option for Sony camera owners who want a wider angled, autofocus full-frame prime to stimulate their creative juices and capture scenes near and far, outdoors and in. If you're interested in the lens, then I've included affiliate links in the description below, and if you use these links, you'll be supporting my channel. Any comments on this video on the lens will be most welcome. Following my PC crash, I've got a lot of catching up to do on reviews of lenses old and new, but please bear with me. So until the next time, all the best.